During our lab, we observed the protists within pond water, and in doing so, we made a wet mount. So, in order for us to make the wet mount, we followed the following procedure. We first placed a drop of pond water onto the center of a slide, and then we placed one edge of the cover slip near the preparation, allowing the cover slip to slightly contact it. Carefully, we lowered it so that no air bubbles would form. Many of the microorganisms that live in freshwater are characterized by their motility. So, as we'll see in the following slide, protists are very mobile, and what they use to move is flagellum, which are long projections that induce whip-like motions, and they also move through things called pseudopods, which are also known as false feet, and those pseudopods slowly move protists, and amoebas are examples of protists that have pseudopods. Here is a video of our pond water in which we can see protists moving as we are moving you can see we are moving the stage, and you can see that several protists towards the bottom are moving, and of course they are moving through their flagellum and pseudopods, although it's kind of difficult to see. And those were some examples of the protists that we saw within our pond water. Here's another video of us observing the protists moving within our water, and you can see, although they're very small, you can see them moving. Of course, with their flagella and pseudopods, although it's very difficult to see them because they are so small. Another kingdom of life that we observed is fungi. And fungi are eukaryotes, and they are both unicellular and multicellular, and they are found worldwide. They reproduce asexually, in which they spread rapidly by means of asexual spores called conidia. And the image on the upper right-hand corner, you can see conidium, which is zoomed in at 69 micrometers, and those are the spores that cause asexual reproduction. And fungi also reproduce sexually through the union of gametes, the formation of zygotes, and ultimately the process of meiosis. Heterotrophs are also fungi are also heterotrophs, which means that they rely on organic compounds produced by other organisms for energy or metabolism. And an example of a fungi is Aspergillus fumigatus, which is a common conidial mold that can cause potentially fatal lung disease. And the common term for this is sick building syndrome, and it means that this mold, which grows in poorly ventilated air and moist places, is the cause of that. And going back to the fact that fungi are unicellular and multicellular, a division of fungi of yeast, they are unicellular and have a globular form, and mold, which is multicellular, has a filamentous form, more like a rod shape. And an example of fungi are mushrooms, which you can see in the picture in the lower right-hand corner. An example of fungi that we observed was Penicillium, which produces penicillin, and penicillin is a molecule that is used as an antibiotic, which stops or kills the growth of certain bacteria within the body. And here we can see it at a magnification of 400. We also observed a type of budding yeast called Saccharomyces cerevisiae, and it reproduces by asexual budding, and it also grows aerobically, which means that it requires oxygen to generate energy. And here we can see a picture of it at a magnification of 1000. Moving on to the kingdom of Plantae. Plantae are eukaryotes, and they are multicellular, and they are found worldwide. They reproduce both sexually and asexually through the fusion or non-fusion of gametes. The fusion of gametes causing sexual reproduction, or non-fusion of gametes, which is asexual reproduction. They are autotrophs, and they use photosynthesis to gain energy or metabolize. And plants provided humans with essential nutrients for survival. So without plants, most likely it would be very difficult for humans to survive, and we probably wouldn't even exist, because plants provide us with very essential nutrients that we need to live, such as grains, fruits, vegetables that we eat. And plants can also have a negative effect. For example, plants with wind-blown pollen can cause allergic reactions, and poisonous plants can also cause serious harm or even death. For example, poison ivy causes skin irritation, and toxobumins are also very poisonous type of plants that can result in death. And over on the right, we can see a photo of a Venus flytrap, which is an example of a plant, and also underneath that is poison ivy. During our lab, we prepared an Elodea leaf wet mount, and in order to do this, we used our tweezers to remove a small Elodea leaf from the growing tip of an Elodea sprig, and then we added a drop of water to a blank slide, added the leaf to it, and then covered it with a cover slip carefully again, as trying not to get any air bubbles in it. And then we located the cells with low power and then focused on a small number of cells using high power. Here we can see the 3 microscopic photos we took of our Elodea sample. On the top left, we can see Elodea at a magnification of 40 times. Underneath that, we can see Elodea at a magnification of 100 times. And the large photo on the right is Elodea magnified 400 times. So in this large photo, we can see the nucleus, which is of a brownish color, and that's where the control center of the cell. And to the right of that, we can see a blank space, which is the vacuole of the cell. And then we can see to the right of that, the bright greenish colored chloroplasts, which are where the pigment is stored and where photosynthesis occurs within the Elodea cells. And then surrounding all of that, we can see the cell walls, which we can see very distinctly. They're almost brick-like. And some facts about Elodea leaves: they metabolize through photosynthesis, and Elodea leaves also provide a very good habitat for aquatic invertebrates and young fish, along with amphibians. And they are also found in fresh water. Now, moving on to the final kingdom of life, Animalia. Animalia are eukaryotes, and they are multicellular, which means that they lack cell walls. They are also found worldwide, and they reproduce through sexual reproduction. And the formation of somatic cells or body cells is through the process of mitosis, and sex cells, also known as gametes, are produced through the process of meiosis. Animalia are heterotrophs, which means that their energy is derived from ingesting other organisms or their products. And some examples of Animalia are herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and also parasites. And humans are animals. So as we can see in the picture, an example of an animal is a Bactrian camel, and humans as well. In our lab, we observed cheek cells, and ours were from Navi, and we prepared a wet mount for them. So we used the broad end of a toothpick and lightly scraped the inside of our cheek, in this case Navi's. Then we stirred the scraping into a drop of methylene blue on a microscope slide, and then covered it with this cover slip, being careful not to produce any air bubbles. And then we placed the slide on the microscope stage, and using low power we observed it, and then we observed it using high power. Here is the photo taken of Navi's cheek cell, and cheek cells are eukaryotic, of course, because they are animal cells, and they divide and reproduce through mitosis, and they are also epithelial cells because they are on the surface of the inside of our mouth. And in the photo we can see, which is at 400 times magnification, we can see very clearly the nucleus of a cheek cell, which is pointed out by the yellow arrow. And surrounding that we can see the cytoplasm, which is pointed out by the red arrow. And then enclosing the cell is the plasma membrane, which we can see pointed out by the blue arrow. Lastly, we observed red blood cells. And for a bit of background on them, mammal red blood cells are anucleate, which means they lack a nucleus, and red blood cells are produced through erythropoiesis, and red blood cells are also called erythrocytes. And RBCs deliver oxygen throughout the body via blood, and their cells consist of three layers: a glycocalyx, a lipid bilayer, and a membrane skeleton, which is widely filled with proteins. And so for the images, we can see on the upper left, we have a photo of red blood cells, which are barely visible at 40x. As we move on to 100x magnification, we can see them a bit clearer, but on the right, we can see them quite clearly. They are very spherical, and we can see them at a magnification of 400x. And although it's quite hard to tell, they do not have a nucleus, and they're very plain. And this presentation concludes our observations for Lab 5, Microscopic Observation of Cells.